Shannon Tweed and Gene Simmons first met at the Playboy Mansion in 1983. Their 2011 wedding wasn't about love, even though he had been with her for 28 years. It had to do with hiding a scandal that nearly brought his family to ruin. Conversations that were never intended to be public are revealed in recently uncovered video from their reality program. A plagiarism scandal ensnared his son. Incidents involving female employees are mentioned in 2025 legal documents. There are now repercussions for the man, who allegedly had sex with 4,800 women, that go well beyond his outrageous notoriety. At one point, Gene Simmons wasn't Gene Simmons. He was born in Haifa, Israel, on August 25, 1949, under the name Chaim Witz. Flora Kleene, his mother, had just escaped from hell. She had only managed to escape the Nazi concentration camps after being born in Hungary in 1925. Yohil Witz, his father's parents, too, fled Hungary and wed Flora in 1946. In 1947, shortly before the state was established, they relocated to Israel. Their past was filled with suffering, and that suffering subtly permeated everything that would happen. As long as British forces continued to obstruct their path. Things worsened by 1955 when he was 6. His parents' lack of wealth was a major factor in the dissolution of their marriage. His father did not leave Israel. In Tat Carmel, his mother reared him by alone. To support them, she sewed buttons in factories almost every day. Sometimes their dinner consisted of just bread and milk. Chaim was attempting to assist at the age of 7. Along with a companion, he collected wild fruit and sold it by the side of the road. He understood the meaning of hardship. He used an army blanket to make his first winter clothing. He had no other option, but the cold didn't care. He frequently cried himself to sleep in an empty house because his mother worked till late at night. It didn't get any easier at school. He was teased by other children for being unusual. Some of the hatred his mother had fled carried into the classroom, even in post-war Israel. But he was also discovered by something else. American comic books, such as Spider-Man and Superman, became his haven. He made an effort even though he wasn't yet able to read English. He spoke Turkish, Hungarian, and Hebrew by the time he was 7 years old. Additionally, he was now surreptitiously learning English, for the sole reason that he wished to comprehend the heroes in those comics. He found solace in those stories in a post-conflict environment where food was scarce and hope was elusive. Although his mother rarely discussed her experiences, the anguish was always present. Chaim began to perceive it more clearly by 1957. At the age of 14, the Nazis made her work harvesting potatoes in fields as armed troops looked on. She moved between camps, wearing clothing with crosses on it, and watched as one relative at a time, her entire world disappeared. She didn't have to use words to describe it. Her tendency to cry without cause, her overprotectiveness, and her silence. Chaim realized it left him with something as well, a need to never feel helpless and to keep his strength intact. In 1957, Flora made a choice that would alter the course of history. She and her 8-year-old son Chaim fled Israel with very little. They had no English, no money, and no relatives waiting for them when they got to Queens, New York. His father remained, got married again, and began a new life. He was never seen by Chaim again. He changed his name to Eugene Kleene and began anew. He was astounded by TV dinners and clean toilets. However, adjusting wasn't simple. Flora put in a lot of overtime, up to 15 hours a day, in Brooklyn factories. Gene had to learn the norms of a strange new world and take care of himself with babysitters. For a period, he attended a Jewish school, but he didn't belong. He then transferred to a public school. In 1967, he received his diploma from Newtown High. Initially, children made fun of him for his speech patterns. Everywhere he went, his accent made him feel alienated. However, he was not broken by it. He made door-to-door sales of cacti. Like in Israel, he plucked fruit once more. He tried harder after each insult and rejection. By reading more comics and watching TV, he began to pick up English more quickly. His pop culture passion blew up at that point. He formally changed his name once more by 1959, when he was only 9 years old. Gene Kleene, this time. He named Gene after Gene Autry and other cowboy actors. Even though he still shared a small apartment with his mother and relatives, he was now fully committed to being American. He had a deep affection for television, particularly The Ed Sullivan Show. Something ignited inside him when the Beatles made their appearance on February 9, 1964. That was the life he desired. He desired fame and the stage. He still felt like a helpless boy on the inside, but he wanted to feel like someone. In order to blend in, He even occasionally feigned Britishness by mimicking the Beatles' accents. It was popular with girls. He was clumsy and uncertain, undergoing the chaotic transitions of adolescence, but he was gradually becoming more charming. Gene took any work he could find in the 1960s. He was a meat-slicing employee in butcher shops. Behind the counter, he was employed at Deli's. Even though he only made $10–25 per hour, he saved every cent of it. He had learned to count every bit from poverty. Even at parties, he avoided drinking. He observed how elderly men become careless and inebriated. He remained alert. It was how he acquired women. He himself said it. While everyone else lost their lucidity, he used his. He began studying the guitar and practiced all the time. He was unable to quit after watching the Beatles on television. While still in school, he began to build his future by forming small bands. He attended Sullivan County Community College in 1968. By 1970, he had earned an associate's degree in education and was earning $75 per week, teaching 6th grade in Spanish Harlem. However, he wasn't passionate about the classroom. In 1970, he and Paul Stanley created a band called Rainbow, which quickly changed its name to Wicked Lester. They worked various occupations during the day and performed at clubs at night. Gan even had a job at a magazine about fashion. He also worked as a translator, using the Spanish, Turkish, and Hungarian. He learned from neighbors and babysitters when he was younger, but his soul belonged to music. He produced a few solo tracks under his own name and experimented with various sounds. Still bearing the burden of his mother's survival and everything she had lost in 1945, he continued to send money to her. Then came the part of his story that even his admirers found shocking. According to Gene Simmons, he lost his virginity in 1963 when he was about 14 years old. He was a little boy delivering newspapers. He called on the door of a customer one cold evening just before Christmas. She replied, in just a flimsy nightgown, and weeping. She had been married. What came next? He went into much detail in his book. It wasn't the start of his sexual life. Gene Simmons joined Paul Stanley, Steve Coronel, Brooke Ostrander, and Tony Zarella in 1970. Wicked Lester is the name of the band they created. The sound, which originated from the erratic New York City music scene, was an odd blend of rock and folk. Jimi Hendrix had constructed Electric Lady Studios, where they produced a complete album by October 15, 1972. To make it happen, Epic Records had spent a lot of money. Don Ellis, their A&R director, however, detested it to the core. He put it on indefinite hold because he thought the sound was too jumbled and odd for radio. Gan was deeply hurt by that rejection. The project was dead before it had even started, despite the fact that he had put his everything into it. In a fit of rage, Gan and Paul shut down Wicked Lester completely, dismissed Steve Coronel, and briefly brought in Ron Lejak. However, it wasn't the end. In order to ensure that the old Wicked Lester tapes were never published, Gan and Paul paid $138,000 in 1977 to acquire them back after Kiss gained notoriety. The hard-edged image they were now creating was in danger of being ruined by the previous sound. However, songs like She and Love Her, All I Can, which Kiss would later re-record without giving credit to the original lineup, were later discovered through bootlegs that slipped online. Something greater was born out of that band's failure. Gan and Paul finished Compromise in January 1973. Peter Criss, a seasoned drummer from bands like Lips and Chelsea, posted an ad in the Rolling Stone, which they discovered. He joined right away. A Village Voice ad then led them to Ace Frehley. The four of them came up with something completely different. This would not be your typical rock group. The show was going to be outrageous, full of fire, makeup, and imagination. They started Kiss, influenced by Alice Cooper's shock rock and the New York Dolls' glitzy aesthetic. January 30, 1973 was the date of their debut performance. At the Coventry, once known as the Popcorn Club, a tiny club in Queens. There were only 3 attendees, some of whom were the band's girlfriends. However, Gene breathed fire on stage for the first time that evening. It was an unforgettable sight. They gained popularity despite having no hit songs or MTV airplay. Instead of the radio, word got out through live performances and fan publications. They were performing as the main act at Anaheim Stadium in 1974 in just 18 months. According to Gene, folks simply couldn't get their makeup out of their heads because it was so unusual and memorable. It was uncooked, it was spreading, and it was strange. Gene invented the monster in 1973. He painted bat wings around his eyes and began spitting blood and breathing fire on stage. drawing inspiration from comic book villains like Black Bolt and horror movies like Black Sabbath. He had been taught the techniques by an expert. The band had no particular plan when they first began experimenting with cosmetics. Horror was what Gene went for. Peter drew cat-like whiskers on his face. Ace transformed into an extraterrestrial. They painted frantically while standing in front of mirrors, attempting to create something that had never been seen before. Only a dozen people attended their early performances. Crowds at the Coventry were between 10 and 15, and occasionally much smaller. However, those few folks talked as they went. Children were spreading the message even before the internet. Gene reported that although it felt odd and sticky, it was effective. Frustration was transformed into curiosity by that makeup, fire, and blood. A radio hit wasn't necessary for them. All they had to do was be memorable. A man called Bill Aucoin witnessed Kiss perform at the Hotel Diplomat in August 1973. He vowed to secure them a record deal in 2 weeks, since he had such faith in them. And he did. They signed with Neil Bogart's new label, Casablanca Records. By November Honest, Peter Criss literally fell off his platform heels with excitement at hearing the news. Producer Eddie Kramer assisted the band in recording their debut album in a short amount of time. The date of its publication was February 18, 1974. Only 75,000 copies were sold at first, but the band persisted. That year, they performed at more than 300 shows. Despite Casablanca Records' near bankrupt status, Kiss's relentless touring kept them afloat. At first, Neil Bogart was skeptical of their cosmetic trick, but he realized it was effective when he noticed the crowds swelling. Despite not having a single big radio success, they were packing stadiums by 1975. Gann referred to it as a gamble that made them legendary. In those formative years, Gene formed an odd habit. He started recording his sex with Polaroid cameras. As evidence, each woman had to present the hotel key. In interviews, he boasted that he had slept with over 4,600 women, and claimed to have taken almost 5,000 of these pictures over the years. He even showed his guests and friends the pictures. Jefferson Airplane's Grace Slick described it as repulsive. They were all trapped in a box by Gene. That chapter of his life ended when his wife, Shannon Tweed, discovered them after they were married in 2011 and set them on fire, live on their reality program. Despite never using drugs, Gene's sex addiction contributed to his outrageous theatrical image. He transformed turmoil into a performance and into power in venues, ranging from tiny bars to enormous stadiums. Beginning on September 10, 1975, everything changed. They published the live album Alive at that time. It was full of the craziness of their performances, loud and uncensored. In every recording you could hear the blood, the screaming, and the fire. During that year, songs were recorded in cities like Davenport, Detroit, Cleveland, and Wildwood. The album sold over 4 million copies, and certified quadruple platinum on May 16, June 21, July 20, and July 23. For 110 weeks, it remained at number 9 on the Billboard charts. Casablanca avoided bankruptcy thanks to the record. Neil Bogart was even being sued at the time, but Kiss's success saved the company from bankruptcy. They were inspired by Slade's 1972 live album, which was referenced in the album title, Alive. It was evidence that the fire, the lunacy, and the makeup all worked. All of a sudden, they were more than just an odd band. They represented rock's future. They pushed harder in 1976. Under the direction of producer Bob Ezrin, Destroyer was released on March 15. His Shout It Out Loud hit number 31 on the Billboard Hot 100 was enhanced with strings, a children's chorus, reversed drum noises, and sound effects. God of Thunder by Gene was a song of gloom and screaming. When the band handed Ezrin 15 demo recordings in August 1975, he didn't make things simple. He tossed nearly all of them out. In addition to rearranging the music and writing their lyrics, he also played the bass on Detroit Rock City. Some of the songs were inspired by classical music, such as Beethoven's Sonata Pathétique, which was sampled for High Expectations. During a lull in the Alive tour in August 1975, rehearsals got underway, and recording sessions at Electric Lady Studios went on through January and September. Each victory boosted Gann's ego. Additionally, Gene ensured that his persona remained prominent, while Ezrin refined the sound. The tours evolved from concerts to something more by the late 1970s. The shows were complete. Ace Frehley's guitar was blasting rockets at smoke-spouting props, while Gene was flying across the stage during the 1979 Dynasty Tour, which spanned from June 15 to December 16. These stunning effects were produced by their technician, John Elder Robeson. Cracks were seen despite their 92 North American appearances. Certain locations, such as the postponed Pontiac Silverdome performances or the scaled-down Los Angeles performances, were too vacant. Peter Criss was having trouble. His drug addiction worsened. He began ruining performances, pausing mid-performance drumming to vent. It was self-destruction, Gene said. It was evident that the original band was disintegrating by the time of their last performance in Toledo on December 16, 1979. Disco and the shift were perceived by fans as having infiltrated their sound. Hardcore rock fans began to be replaced by families attending events. Gene continued to fly, but the band was rapidly catching up. Things were even stranger in 1978. On October 28, the strange television film Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park was broadcast by NBC. The same people who produced Scooby-Doo, Hanna-Barbera, also produced it. In a theme park, Kiss portrayed themselves as superheroes fighting a malevolent inventor. Gene's spontaneous remarks of dominating the globe echoed his actual strategy to make Kiss a household name. Fans detested the acting because it was so bad. The rest of the band attempted to act as if it had never happened, but Gan relished the spotlight. People on the set were prohibited from discussing the film later because it was so embarrassing. In Europe, where it was retitled Attack of the Phantoms, it still became a cult classic. The project demonstrated that Gene's ego was not just enormous, but also uncontrollable. On September 18 of the same year, each of the four members issued a solo album. A few of Kiss's real group albums were outsold by Gene's record. It featured Bob Seger and Cher as guests, as well as odd covers like When You Wish Upon a Star. His songs discussed warped imaginations and radioactivity. On May 23, 1979, Kiss released Dynasty, which peaked at number 11 on the Billboard charts with the song I Was Made for Lovin' You. It earned platinum in 5 countries and sold more than 1 million copies. However, the disco effect damaged their reputation. Ticket sales plummeted as rock fans left. Venues became smaller. The enchantment was wearing off. Before permanently leaving, Peter Criss only contributed drums to one tune. The Fishers were now splits. In September of 1983, Kiss took the unimaginable action. On MTV, they removed their makeup in real time. They finally showed their true faces after 10 years of secrecy. They also released Lick It Up, which sold over 1 million copies and went platinum. The sound was more forceful, raw, and heavier. Sales surged, fans returned, and the gamble paid off. It was a rebirth to Gene. Kiss made millions of dollars in merchandise by that time, with over 100 licensed products, ranging from lunchboxes to action figurines. The business was growing, but the masks were gone. Gan left music to pursue a career in Hollywood in 1984. In Michael Keaton's science fiction thriller Runaway, he portrayed the antagonist Luther. Drawing from his demon persona, Gan was a crazy scientist who killed people using killer robots. He gave dramatic lines and perished at the hands of his own inventions. In the meantime, Peter Criss was kicked out of the band in 1980 due to his unmanageable addiction. Necessary amputation, Gan said. The Fox, a new drummer, was replaced by Eric Carr. Although the loss was terrible, it gave them a fresh start. The song Forever from Kiss's 1989 album, Hot in the Shade, peaked at number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100. It became their biggest hit during the years when they didn't wear makeup, selling over 500,000 copies. However, the tone was gentle and more romantic than defiant. Sales contradicted the confusion of the fans. Gene continued to pursue women in the background. The band's work was interrupted by his affairs. He was absent from sessions. He chose Hollywood instead of the rehearsals. Little Caesar was Eric Carr's final album before his death in 1991, but it featured his first solo voice. Everything was almost destroyed by Gene's diversions. Gene told the whole truth in Kiss and Makeup, his autobiography published in 2001. During his tenure in the band, he had slept with more than 4,800 women. One of the most outrageous tales originated in the late 70s. Between 1979 and 1980, he dated Cher, but he eventually fell in love with Diana Ross, her best friend. It began as a straightforward Christmas shopping excursion and developed into a major romantic triangle. They were never forgiven by Cher. One of the most well-known betrayals in rock history, the incident blew up in People magazine. Although Gene maintained friendships with both women, the harm was irreversible. Then the greatest twist of all occurred. The original members of Kiss got back together in 1996. The cosmetics came back. Everywhere the shows were sold out. They sold 1.2 million tickets, played 92 gigs, and toured in 75 cities. $143 million was made by the tour. However, there was tension behind the scenes. Gan and Paul received over $110,000 in earnings, while Freely and Chris received flat fees of $80. Every concert. Then came lawsuits. Old scars came back. Both the issues and the success were genuine. They were dissolving once more even as they were setting records. Gene Simmons allowed cameras to follow him on his reality show, Gene Simmons, Family Jewels. From 2006 to 2012, Sophie and Nick. After Dog the Bounty Hunter, the 7-season series was A&E's second biggest hit. The series omitted the most of Simmons' turbulent past, but it did depict him as a softer, more family-oriented Simmons. A sex tape that showed him with another woman then came to light in 2008. Citing a breach of privacy, he filed a lawsuit. The biggest change, however, was when Gene married Shannon in 2011, after avoiding it for 28 years. The wedding garnered media attention. Even though the show's extravagant scenes, such as a fictitious offer to purchase an Australian football team, were ridiculed by some viewers, it succeeded in humanizing a man who was previously exclusively associated with chaos and cosmetics. Gene's economic empire continued to expand. He had applied the Kiss mark to more than 5,000 products by the 2000s. It was present on everything from condoms to coffins to pinball machines. The brand was widely recognized. Over $1 billion was sold. However, he took a step too far in 2017. Gene claimed to have created the well-known devil horns hand motion in 1974 and attempted to trademark it. According to his affidavit, it was a stance akin to the American Sign Language sign for I love you, with the thumb out and the index and pinky fingers up. The reaction was immediate. Metalheads were incensed. He was informed by critics that the gesture had been used long before Kiss, by artists like Ronnie James Dio and John Lennon. Gan abandoned the endeavor a few days later, but the stunt demonstrated the extent of his control-hungry nature. He was followed into other places by trouble. Victoria Jackson, a makeup artist for ESPN, sued Gene in 2010 after claiming that, while wearing a complete costume, he acted improperly during a 2009 SportsCenter appearance. She claimed he humped her and gave her a hug. Gene disputed it, claiming that was impossible due to his metal codpiece. In an attempt to clear his name, he even filed a countersuit. Although the matter was ultimately resolved, he encountered legal issues on other occasions. He was accused of grabbing a waitress at his Rock and Brews restaurant in 2016. In 2017, another woman said the same thing. By 2018, both cases had been quietly settled. These cases added up and suggested a dangerous pattern, even though he frequently rejected them as unfounded. In spite of everything, his wealth kept increasing. Gene Simmons had a net worth of about $400 million by 2015. Music wasn't the only source of that. The mountains of Kiss merchandise were the source of it. Continually touring and selling over 100 million albums, he and Paul Stanley started the Rock and Brews restaurant franchise in 2012, and it has since expanded to several locations. Additionally, he became interested with unconventional endeavors such as The Vault, a 2017 compilation of rare recordings that cost $2,000 to release. Additionally, he became the chief evangelist officer of Invictus MD, a cannabis startup, in 2018. By 2025, his solo tour alone was earning six figures every concert, without even requiring the entire Kiss setup. In 2013, he invested in the La Kiss Arena football team, which disbanded after a few years. In 1983, he started dating Shannon Tweed at the Playboy Mansion. Shannon knew he had a reputation when he came into Gene's life. He had won Playmate of the Year in 1982. By 2002, he claimed to have about 5,000 lovers, yet they continued to live together. 1989 saw the birth of their son Nick, and 1992 saw the birth of their daughter Sophie. According to Groucho Marx, Gene would make jokes about marriage being a trap, but his actions finally got to Shannon. She called Joy Behar a pig and stormed off the Joy Behar show in 2011. She discovered his collection of obscene Polaroids later that year and set them on fire. Fans were surprised by that moment, but something changed. On July 26, 2011, Gan proposed to her in Belize, and on October 1, they were married. Sophie was the maid of honor, and Nick served as a groomsman. In particular, after 28 years of resistance, it was surprising and emotional. The tension was evident in their reality program. The pivotal moment occurred in season 6, when Shannon momentarily left the show, because to a picture of Jean with two models at a 2009 event in Santa Monica. She claimed she was taken by surprise and never consented to be in an open relationship when the show followed them into therapy. At last, Jean revealed that his early life had left him with severe anxiety about commitment. Everyone was taken by surprise when he proposed to her. Over the course of its 167 episodes, the show revealed more than simply their friendship. It revealed the suffering and strain that came with becoming famous. Jean's gruff man persona crumbled in 2018. Flora Clean, his mother, died on December 5 at the age of 93, having survived the atrocities of Nazi camps and lost her own mother in a gas chamber. She was a Holocaust survivor. She raised Jean by herself after moving to Israel and subsequently New York in 1958. He constantly gave her credit for forming his morals. He was shaken by her death on Instagram. He encouraged others to value their mothers and referred to her as his moral compass. She was referred to be the best grandmother by his wife Shannon, and Paul Stanley characterized her as intensely affectionate. Fans saw Jean without the mask for the first time. Not even his kids were exempt from the limelight. The comic book Incarnate, written by his son Nick, was accused of copying the Japanese manga Bleach in 2010. Supporters demanded accountability and made precise panel comparisons. Nick apologized and said the comic was intended as homage after the publisher removed it. But the criticism persisted. Critics claimed that the copying was too blatant and the artwork was amateurish. The incident hurt Nick's reputation as a creative and followed him onto their reality program, despite Jean's defense of his son. In 2024, Jean's tendency to say exactly what he believes caused more problems. During a guest appearance on Dancing with the Stars on October 8, he made remarks regarding female dancers that many people found unsettling. He kept remarking about how gorgeous they looked rather than their performances. For all the wrong reasons, a statement about Chandler Kenny fogging up his glasses went viral. People demanded that ABC apologize after he was referred to as the gross uncle on social media. Gan refused to give up. He stated he stood by everything he said in an interview on October 10. In April 2025, the fan box arrived. Fans could participate in the ultimate Gene Simmons experience, where they would spend a day as his roadie for $12,495 not including the ticket. In addition to getting a signed bass guitar, they would be able to assist with sound check, eat backstage, and even be introduced on stage. It was criticized for being tone-deaf and shameless, particularly in hard economic times. However, the package was sold out. The trip was paid for by one fan, a retired soldier, who felt it was well worth the money. Nevertheless, given Gene's affluence, the prank rekindled discussions about celebrity avarice. That was hardly the end of the debate. President Trump said that Kiss would be honored by the Kennedy Center on August 13, 2025. The fans were perplexed. In interviews just 3 years prior, Gene had denounced Trump as disgusting for inciting hatred. He even likened Trump's ascent to cockroaches emerging from the walls after January 6. Now, however, he was giving the band an award. Memes and charges of hypocrisy went viral on the internet. The silence spoke louder than Simmons' words. Simmons also resumed touring as a solo artist in 2025. He performed sans the typical Kiss armor on August 3 at the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally, sharing tales from his half-century career. Due to poor sales, a number of dates were canceled by March 23. Supporters believed he had overreached himself by putting financial gain ahead of the people who created him. However, Gene maintained that without the enormous Kiss equipment, things were now simpler. Gan sobbed during a CBS Mornings interview on July 23, 2025, the day Ozzy Osbourne passed away. He recalled Kiss's role as Black Sabbath's 1975 opening act and described Ozzy as a true egoary soul. He even disclosed that Kiss previously declined a Sabbath tour in the 1970s because to their extensive drug use. Simmons wants to maintain a clean image for his band. Fans were taken aback by that fact.